Joining us now to respond, the senator from the great free state of Florida, Ashley Moody. Senator Moody, so, it is kind of interesting where you see all of these socialists cropping up. It is very much a rejection of Democrat policies in places where Democrats have controlled things. It's been one-party control for a very long time. But I do think it's interesting that Republicans have failed to figure out a way to capture that discontent among people who are sick and tired of Democrat policies in liberal places and not successfully offer a version that attracts those voters over to freedom.
Well, what we failed at is effectively combating the communist con that, doing away with a free people and free markets is going to make their lives more prosperous and thriving. I mean, you heard either he is ignorant or he is willfully trying to mislead people. I mean, he fled from a place, he said that the economic situation was disastrous, and so they fled that. They don't seem to understand that is the exact policies, the government taking control, the government forcing out independence and free markets and private property rights and all of these things. That is what does that. They flee here. And so I live in the great free state of Florida, where we have a lot of people that had families going back generations that fled these nation states that failed because of the exact policies that they are pushing, which is defund police, open up your borders, defund the military, seize production. In fact, somebody that just got elected for one of these DSA people, they said, they founded an organization that said, we are Westerners that want to eradicate Western civilization. They are pushing a con. If they are talking about they want to bring more democracy to working people, it is a con. And we have, you are right, we have failed at communicating what is really going on here. And trust me, it is infectious. The Democrat Party in the Senate, they are voting in lockstep with the Democrat Socialist platform, lockstep. They voted just this week to defund the military. They voted to defund law enforcement. They shut down the government over it, and they shut down the government to open back up the border. They're voting with Iran and Hamas. I'm not making this up. It is the exact platform of the DSA. That's the Democratic Senate right now.
I'm sure that there are a lot of young people who are, running after this circus who are well-intended. They're kind of useful idiots. However, there are very powerful moneyed interests who understand what the opportunity that something like socialism in America brings, because it puts them in control of absolutely everything. And I think a lot of these young people don't even understand that. And one of the things that they love to talk about is Medicare for all. Well, Medicare for all is just government-run socialized medicine that will both destroy our medical system and also bankrupt Medicare.
Well, this is the one thing that they fail to say when they're saying, we're going to make your lives better. They don't explain that they want government to control every facet of your life. They want government to own your houses, own your cars, own everything about you, provide your health care, provide your food. And they trick the people into giving away all of their rights and autonomy to the government, which then controls every aspect of your life. That is communism. We are on a slow march towards communism, which will wreck this country the way it wrecked every other nation state that has tried it. And we as Republicans have to speak out. We have to do so in a clear way that shows there is a clear difference between the Republicans of today. Look at me. I'm married to a cop. I was a prosecutor, a judge, attorney general. I spent my whole life standing up for law enforcement, making sure we're locking up dangerous people, fighting for independent rights. I'm running against two people right now, one endorsed by Ilhan Omar, who said she wants to abolish ICE, and the other that called law enforcement fascist militia thugs. I mean, this is your Democrat Party right now. There's never been a more clear difference between the two. We have got to communicate to the American people to save this country.
One of the things that I find really curious about this moment that we're in, and you're right, they have taken over the Democrat Party, is that so much of this has been led by very young people. Bernie Sanders, who's ancient, and then all of these young people. And it's so funny to me, or not funny, it's alarming to me, because I think of young people as being the people who don't want to be told what to do. The whole point of being a rebel when you're young is that you're learning how to tell your parents to buzz off and I'm going to do my own thing. Yet these young people are running after this political program that basically begs to be told what to do and begs to have their freedom taken away from them.
And this is why it is the biggest con going on. They are teaching our children through the education system to protest, to rebel, to resist, to speak out, to do all of these things. In DC, they are teaching people kids how to do that, but they won't have them stand up and recite the pledge. I mean, it is an education system that are teaching these kids to incite rebellion and violence and anarchy with not even understanding what they're actually fighting for is giving away their rights to the government. It is unbelievable where we find ourselves, and that is why it is so important that we start talking, speaking out, making sure people understand that there is a clear difference between the parties these days.
As the late, great Charles Krauthammer used to say, when conservatives gave up university campuses in America, they gave up that fight. Ashley Moody, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thanks for watching. Check out my new podcast, Hanging Out with me, Sean Hannity. The big interviews, the debates you won't get anywhere else. Like and subscribe for new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday.